Good morning and happy Monday, everyone. It is March 13th, which means we're about halfway through March. I'm realizing that I comment a lot on the time aspect of things going into this, so maybe I need to pull back on that. I just always find it interesting how time moves. I can't believe that we're halfway through the third month of 2023. It's just incredible to me. So maybe I'll try to stop commenting on that. But at any rate, this is our bright spot session for the week of March 13th. And so if you're joining this or watching this video for the first time, my name is Taryn Hewitt. I am a work-life balance coach. I'm the owner of Happy Thoughts Coaching, and then I am the organizer of the Facebook group Work-Life Balance for Overachievers. So if you're watching this actually on March 13th, that means that you're actually in the group. I do have new YouTube video channel that these are starting to be posted on to make it easier for the group members to access them, and also for other people outside the group to access them. However, they are posted on a delay through that YouTube channel. And so if you're watching through YouTube, you may be watching this at a later date. It doesn't matter. In this case, the video we're talking about today, or the topic we're talking about, is relevant for any time. But if you are interested in getting these videos in a more timely manner, then go to Facebook and just check out the group Work-Life Balance for Overachievers. So that being said, let's just dive in. The topic today is one that I always just find interesting. It's kind of this concept that can feel a little foreign to a lot of people. And so that's why I really like the idea of digging into it today. And so what we're going to talk about today is, when can stress be a good thing, right? So the reason I say that can be a very interesting topic for a lot of people is I think most of us are geared to think that stress is negative or stress is a bad thing. Give me a lot of negative connotations with it, which is completely understandable. But there's actually, in a lot of cases, stress can be actually a really wonderful thing. And so what we're going to talk about today is kind of an examination of those instances when stress can actually work for you, while also keeping in mind that stress of any kind is not sustainable long term. And so what we'll talk through in partnership with the benefits of stress, or when stress can be beneficial, we'll talk about how to essentially experience that stress in a productive way, in a way that's ultimately going to support you long term rather than hinder you, right? Because that's the only way that stress can actually be a good thing, is if it is ultimately helping you, right? So that being said, there are really, when I was thinking through this, and there's probably more instances, but there are 4 instances that essentially came to mind for me when I was thinking about instances where stress can be a good thing. So the first is when it helps you move into action. The second is when it helps you push out of a comfort zone. The third is when it helps you push past discomfort that's creating avoidance. And then the fourth is when it helps you examine the true thoughts and emotions you might be having about a situation. So having hit all of those, let's kind of dive into each one of them a little bit deeper. So the first one I mentioned is stress can be really helpful when it helps you move into action. And so what I mean by that is a lot of times, many of us, especially if you're watching this video, what I focus on is not just work-life balance, but work-life balance for overachievers, right? So people who are watching this video, you have big goals, you have big dreams, you have big things that you want to work on that might be harder than what the average person is working towards. And so whenever we are faced with big challenges or big goals, it's really easy and also very normal to kind of get stuck in a spot of inaction, where you may be doing lots of things but not actually moving forward, or you may have the idea of something for a really long time but not actually take action on it. And so part of that is typically rooted in some sense of wanting to maintain the status norm, or the status quo, or wanting to not experience some negative emotions, right? So if you're doing something big, that comes with a lot of risk, whether it's financial risk or emotional risk. There's risk with doing anything that's big or anything that's new. And so we can get stuck in inaction. And so one way that stress can help you move into action is, to a degree, if you start to feel like what I'm going to call our negative emotions, like that turmoil, that frustration about the lack of progress that you're making. Stress, that is a form of stress, obviously, and then that stress can help propel you into action. Or another example of that could be maybe maybe you've been wanting to do something and there's some major life change that happens. I'm going to use an example, and this is a harsh example, and it may not fit everyone, but it's probably an easy example to understand. Is, unfortunately right now, with where things are, there are a lot of companies that are doing layoffs, as an example, and that's a really difficult situation. It's not a situation I would wish on anyone. It's not a situation you want anyone to have to go through. But that could be something where somebody is so frustrated, or they're looking for any opportunity to kind of take control of their lives, that they could be willing to go through a different kind of stress to open a business, or to try a different career, or to, any number of things, right? So that's that new action, or that new progress, is stimulated by the stress of the situation. So those are just a couple of examples that might help you kind of think about stress moving you into action. Now, the big thing that we want to talk about with that is, obviously, stress of any kind is not sustainable. It has its uses. It has certainly plenty of benefits, but it's a really good example is like if you're driving your car, right, and you are pushing your car at 100 miles an hour or more than that. The car can do it. It's not that it can't do it. You can have stress. You can operate really well under stress, but you can't do that long term. Your car cannot sustain driving at 100 miles or more long term without starting to have some kind of performance issues. And it's the same for you. And so whenever you are talking about trying to kind of use stress as a way to propel yourself forward, there are a couple things to think through with that. So one is obviously sometimes that movement into action could just be created from short-term stress, right? So if it's short-term stress, this may not be too big of an issue, but if you have to kind of face long-term stress, you definitely want to have some kind of plan in place to help you sustain yourself through that. And so this is probably an opportunity for another video on another day, so I won't talk about it too much. But the biggest thing I'm going to say about stress, right, is you want to obviously be careful that stress doesn't turn into burnout. And so one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that you're giving yourself breaks from whatever it is that you're working on. So again, if it's short term, it may not be something that you have to consciously think of. But if let's say that you are opening a business, or you are starting a new career, like when you're talking about things that are long term and they require a lot of long term action, it's going to be important for you to build in those opportunities to rest and to take a break and to revitalize yourself, because that stress is not sustainable. So just know that going into it. If you know that you're going to need those breaks, then you can plan them in. You can do them in a way that supports your overarching goal. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with that to make it work really well for you. Now, the second instance that I mentioned where stress can be really good is pushing you out of a comfort zone. So this is somewhat related to what I was just talking about, but it could show up in a different way. So maybe just a really easy example would be if you have some anxiety around public speaking. So that's something that you really want to do, or it's really important for a role or something that you're working on. There is some there's stress that is associated with actually doing that, right? Like a lot of people have genuine fear, genuine anxiety that is associated with public speaking. And so one of the best things that you can do if you are looking at using your stress to push out of a comfort zone is you can look for opportunities to kind of baby step it. If you would like to do that, that can be a way to maybe do that without overwhelming yourself, or again pushing yourself to that place of burnout. And so that if public speaking is one of those examples, obviously you can always reach out to me, but that could also be something where you're connecting with your leader in your organization or somebody who is part of that situation where you do need to public speak. If you're doing it at your corporate job, if you're doing it as part of your business, like look for opportunities to talk to other people and to create situations where you could test that out, right? So if you have never spoken to anybody, then maybe you need to practice on a group of friends or a group of family members that you feel safe with. And then maybe it's moving beyond that. So that example is obviously very specific to public speaking, but I think you understand what I'm saying, which is that there's stress associated with that change, and it's wonderful to push towards it, right? Like pushing out of your comfort zone is the only way you're going to make growth in that type of situation or progress towards a larger goal. You just want to figure out how to kind of embrace the stress of that change in a way that is sustainable and not overwhelming, right? Okay. So the third instance that I talked about where stress can be a really good thing is pushing past discomfort that is creating avoidance. And so what I mean by that, again, some of these might sound very similar, but they really are different instances. So the first one we talked about was moving into action, which has a level of avoidance, but there's also avoidance that doesn't necessarily have to be connected to progress. So let me maybe give it just an example that comes to mind for me immediately is if you are in a corporate role or you have a business, whatever the case is, maybe there's something that you need to be doing on a regular basis, like projects that you are supposed to be a part of, or an action that you should be taking in your business, and that idea really scares you, or there could be there can be so many emotions connected to this, but a lot of times if there's any amount of like self-judgment or doubt, you may find yourself completely avoiding the task or the project or procrastinating in some way. The example that I can think of for myself is I've seen this a few times in my corporate career where maybe I've had like a deadline on a project or a deadline to get something over to somebody, and I felt really unsure about the results that I was going to be able to generate, or if it was really what they were looking for, or if I really understood the project, right? Like there might have been some aspect of just doubt or fear connected with it. And a lot of times what my tendency would be was to just like put it on the back burner and just like not even touch it. Right? Like it was just complete avoidance. Now, of course, what would ultimately happen is I would get closer and closer to that deadline, and the task would still be there. I would still need to be working on it. I would still need to do it. The fear and the doubt didn't go away. And so what I had to do in a lot of instances is embrace the stress and the discomfort of going back to somebody and saying, okay, I need clarification, or I need to understand this better, or, something along those lines. So that's a different kind of stress, um, to maybe admit that you don't know everything, or you maybe misunderstood, or you're not certain about it, right? Like all of these emotions, any emotion that's creating discomfort, for you is going to be some level of stress. And so the thing that's also probably important to call out there, and the thing that is similar across all of these, is that you might notice that I've had stress in that situation regardless, right? So even if I was avoiding that project, or even if I was avoiding that task, or asking about that task, or asking for clarification, I was experiencing stress about my fear and my anxiety and my uncertainty, right? So the stress lived there anyways, but it took embracing a different kind of stress to actually resolve it and move forward, right? So and this is something that I've actually practiced over time, quite a bit, is of moving past avoidance of things like those by addressing the doubt and the uncertainty early. So if I put it on my list and I start to notice those doubts, rather than waiting and addressing them closer to the deadline, I will just stop and kind of like write out what it is, what thoughts are coming up, why am I having doubts, what's going on, and I'm pretty much always able to make some kind of solid plan based off of that simple thought analysis, and then move forward right away where I have plenty of time to actually complete the project or the task, whatever the case is, right? So it's almost like embracing that stress of the fear, of the uncertainty right away, so that I move past the avoidance, like I mentioned to begin with. So hopefully all of that makes sense. The last instance that we talked about is stress can be really helpful in examining your true thoughts and emotions on an issue. And so what I mean by that is, because stress is associated with these uncomfortable emotions, the inclination many of us have. So when you think about stress, right? Stress is at its very core a fight or flight response, right? And so when we experience these negative emotions, a lot of times what the majority of us do is we will either fight against them or we will run away from them. So creating avoidance or creating tension of some other kind, right? Which is part of what propels you into action. So all of these things are linked together. Hopefully that's all starting to become clear. But my point with this last one is that sometimes there is value in not taking immediate action when you feel stress, not running from the stress, but really just allowing yourself time and space to sit with it and sit with those uncomfortable emotions and really try to understand what's happening with them. Like what are you feeling? What are you making that mean for yourself? What labels or judgments are you putting on those emotions, or your initial inclination of what to do with those emotions? So again, I feel like almost all of these could maybe be even their own separate video where we dive into each one and talk about them with a little bit more specifics. But hopefully that, at least in the meantime, gives you a glimpse into some instances where stress can be a really wonderful thing. And so the thing I'm going to say with that is, don't run from stress. Right? So if that's your inclination, is to avoid it or run from it of some kind, like, it's a very normal reaction. It's very typical to hear that, but maybe look for those opportunities where it can actually benefit you and it can really serve a really wonderful purpose in your life to help you make great progress. And I mentioned this with one of those scenarios, but the key thing that I'm going to call out with all of those is that each one of those scenarios had a level of stress, right? So there's a quote that I've heard before, and I think it's related. I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but it's related to weight loss, and I think it's something to the tune of um, being overweight is hard, losing weight is hard, choose your hard, right? So I think you can apply that quote to stress and say, like, when you are in situations that are creating stress, that's difficult, right? Everything that we just talked about is going to create some level of stress. Moving past that stress is also going to create stress, but that doesn't have to be bad. Neither of those have to be bad. So it's all about kind of recognizing where you're at, what it is that you're looking for, and what is the choice that you ultimately want to make. Like in that quote example, like, are you choosing losing weight? Are you choosing being overweight? Like, ultimately, the choice is yours, and you decide what timing is right for you, and you decide when it is that you're ready to take on the stress of that change. And you also decide how to manage the stress of that change. So everything about this is about your choice, but recognizing the value that can come with being uncomfortable. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that kind of sparked some ideas and maybe triggered a few thoughts around things that you might be avoiding or stress that you might be avoiding. If you have questions as you think about any of the scenarios that I mentioned, or maybe something specific that you're going through, I would love to talk about that. I would love to help you kind of think through some ideas or understand what you might be avoiding or what might be creating discomfort for you so that you can figure out how to move past it. So um, if that's something that you want help with, just drop a comment in the chat here. Or of course, as always, you can send me an email, you can send me a message or a DM, whatever the case is, and I would love to talk with you. So in the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week, and we will talk soon. Thanks. Bye.